My earliest memory of Laos is, I have to say that I was born in 1972, and it's important to understand that the war ended in 1975. So I was fairly young, and so my memory is, memories of being very young, being carried by my mother. I have very limited memories in Laos because I was so young. But I do have a memory right now with me often, which is, and it's quite sad, but visiting a grave. Visiting a grave. And as I was growing up, I did confirm with my mother because I kept on seeing that picture in my head, being carried by my mother and visiting a grave. Um, and so my mom confirmed to me that that was my oldest sister. She was very sick during the war and she died. My father was away fighting in the war. My oldest sister was around like 2 or 3 years old. And so I really don't have much memories of my childhood in Laos except that. And yes, it did force me to confirm with my mother because it's a memory that often come to me. And so I don't have much, but that's one of my greatest memory in Laos. Stories that I've heard from my parents were that we had to cross the Mekong River to the Thailand refugee camps. And so not only being carried, I don't think I was old enough to kind of walk on my own because the jungles is really, really thick and it's mountains. We're in the highlands. So the stories that I've heard from my parents is that we had to cross the Mekong River to get to the refugee camps. Yeah. My memories in the refugee camp, which is Ban Vinai, I was actually old enough to remember the name of the camp, which is called Ban Vinai Refugee Camp. I remember growing up playing with friends, going places, doing lots of walking. I did not have any formal education, did not go to school at all. Just hanging around with friends. My parents grew a garden, and so I remember going to the garden with my parents, my father especially. I remember we lived in it's kind of like a bungalow with other families. And then I remember we have a place to cook, but then another place to sleep in. I remember just walking around with friends, going to places with friends a lot. We don't have toys, so we played with pebbles. We played with rubber bands. Those were our toys. So for me, just hanging out with my friends, just really try to make the best of it. But at the same time, I did have a memory of me being very sick. I was very sick at one time. And so, and it was, it was not a good experience because there's no clinics or no doctors to go see, but I do have that memory of being sick in the camp and also being afraid at night. So even, I was very afraid at night. I don't know why, but I did not like sleeping in the refugee camp. But my most wonderful memories are memories of being with friends, and just being a kid, but we didn't have very much. We do what we could, and by that time in the camp, we have about 8 children already in my family. So one thing that I remember is always being hungry, not having enough to eat, but at the same time, my parents they were farmers in Laos. So when we were in Thailand, they grew a garden. So I remember the garden. So we always have enough to eat, but just enough to eat to survive, because I remember being hungry a lot of the time. Yes, so my father fought for the American CIA during the Vietnam War back in Laos, and that basically gave him the privilege of coming to America if he wanted to. But what happened was he's the oldest son in the family, and so my grandparents were also with my other uncles in the camp during that time. My father decided that it was his responsibility as the oldest son to make sure that my grandparents and his brothers had the opportunity to come to America first. He wants to ensure that they were safe before he himself, decided to take his whole family to America. So as you can see, my family came to America in 1982. We were one of the last groups of Hmong refugees to come to America in the 80s. So because my father delayed his process of coming to make sure that his parents and his brothers were taken care of first. So for as far as the process of coming to America, that was one thing that my father struggled with for being the oldest son. And so after my grandparents came to America, then he decided that then it was our turn to come. So I've heard stories from the elders. Two things about America. I had no clue where or what America was back then. So I heard two things. Positive was it's a place where sidewalks were paved in gold. Okay, that was like, wow, that's awesome, right? And the other story, which was a little scary, was it's a place where there were huge dragons and monsters that eat people alive, right? So that was scary for a young child for me. So I had conflicting feelings about coming to America, but I did have a picture of me on that day of coming to America. I'm really happy, wanting to be in front of everybody, to be in the picture. So I had a picture of me along that journey. I remember coming with a group of relatives to send us off. I remember buses, big, huge charter buses waiting for people. I remember boarding the buses, with other people, sticking my head out of the window. I saw my parents crying, saying goodbye to relatives, to friends. That was basically my most vivid memory of that day. I remember the bus took us to another camp. I was too young to remember where, but I remember we arrived in another camp. And in this camp, as far as my memory as a child and watching my parents, is a place where they were to be educated about how to live in America. They were taught a little. So my parents started going to classes to learn basic English. And how to operate maybe like a stove or appliances. So I know that my parents were getting some sort of education. For me, I did not remember going to school, but that was a fairly short, I would say, couple months, just living in that particular camp. So to me, it was more like an educational location for my parents. More for my parents to kind of educate them about where they're going and how pretty much how to survive learning basic English. So yeah, so the educational camp that I feel that it's the educational camp. I think that is Bangkok. So because that was the destination where I noticed that my parents were being educated for something. Then yes, then one day, yes, we packed everything, and then we went from one location to another because my father, we had like 8 children and we were all very young. So I was the second oldest one. So that means we were all super young. My mother must be carrying a child and then carrying a whole bunch of stuff. My father, I remember very vivid, me walking, carrying things, but my father would take one suitcase and then walk really fast ahead of everybody, put it down, and then come back and get another suitcase and then walk really fast and put it down. And that was how my father, that was the day that we were traveling to the airport or wherever we were going. I noticed that my father was the only person carrying the heavy load, so we must have been super, super young. So I guess for me, I must have felt my father struggled a lot more, so I did not notice the checking in into the airport. But then we finally got into the airplane, right? Inside the airplane. And it was very scary. A lot of people, many people were in the plane. My family, we were so huge, so we didn't get to sit with my parents, and so we were kind of like scattered in the airplane. So it was pretty scary because we didn't speak English then. We didn't know where we were going, but at the same time, like I said, it was exciting because of course, we're going to a different place of we don't know where. But we felt safe because our parents were with us in the plane, and and so the plane itself, the plane ride was exciting. Never been in a plane in my entire life. But then what happened was during the flight, one of my brothers became very, very ill, became very, very sick. And so we, instead of flying straight to Denver, Colorado, that was our destination. But because of my brother's temperature, we were stopped. And so we were dropped off in San Francisco. Yeah, that was one thing that I remembered. Instead of going straight to Denver, Colorado, we were detoured to San Francisco because of my brother's illness. So when we got to San Francisco, I knew that my father was very occupied with my brother being very sick, so they took him to the hospital. And so I know that we didn't stay too long in San Francisco, but it must have been a couple days. I remember eating chocolate for the first time. We were giving snacks, and so whatever snacks that I was eating was a bar, like a candy bar, but it was a chocolate bar. And it was like the most amazing thing that I've tasted in my entire life. And so I love those little bars that they gave me. So that was one of my great memory in San Francisco. But we didn't stay there too long. And so once my brother's fever stabilized and he was fine, then we were boarded on a plane again, and this time we were going to where we're supposed to go, which my uncle was our sponsor back then. We were the last few waves of Hmong to come to America, so by then we already had relatives in America, so they could sponsor us now. But my uncle and the earlier groups of Hmong refugees that came to America were sponsored by either groups of, mostly by the churches. So one great memory of flying to Denver, Colorado. I looked out the window and I saw mountains filled with white things. And I thought to myself, my goodness, they're salt. They're mountains filled with salt, right? And so I'm like amazed by what I saw. And so finally we stopped and we got to Denver, Colorado. We got off. I remember they were calling for the passenger to exit, and my father would be trying to ask the flight attendants, is this, I guess he was trying to speak. So I'm assuming my father is asking, is this Denver, Colorado? Is this where we need to get off? And so because we were the last people to get off. My father wants to make sure that we are where we need to be. So we got off, and we met my uncle and saw the relatives that came and waited for us, and it was a beautiful sight. At least we see people that we knew, and it was a beautiful feeling for, I think, believe my father and my mother, to see someone that you know and you feel you can relax a little bit. I can only imagine it must have been very scary for them, especially with all the little children that they have to worry about, and then at the same time just worrying about the unknown, the uncertainty. So that was my first experience getting off the plane. And then I do not have memory of my first day of school. For some reason, I can't remember, but I remember going to school. I remember my parent taking us to school, and I was bused to a different school because the home school that I'm supposed to go to, it was full. So I was bused to a different school where I was enrolled in the 4th grade. So I started school in this country in the 4th grade, no English. But one thing that I remember feeling is I was very excited. I was very excited to go to school, but at the same time, I was very, very lonely. I remember lonely and just being scared because I didn't know how to make friends. I remember being pulled out to learn English with an ELD teacher. I'm assuming that she was a resource teacher to help students who are English learners. I remember being in a classroom, and my teacher, she was an African American lady, and she is one person that inspired me to be an educator today. Not only was she accepting and loving to me, she showed me what America was all about. So through her, I saw my first movie, and it's called Footloose. And the only reason why I remember Footloose, because I remember the feet dancing to the music at the start of the movie. So that was my first, like, oh my God, this is so cool, right? And then she took me to, I believe, to the mall, and she bought me a toy, a real toy for the first time. And I remember it was a little toy where if you put water inside it, then the flower opens up. And that was like really cool too. And then she took me to McDonald, and she introduced me to my first Happy Meal. And I love the hamburger, the cheeseburger, right? But the amazing thing was I love the fries. But I didn't know they were called fries then. But for some odd reason, I know they were made out of potato. So I would tell her I would like some potato, So that's my early memory of going to school and experiencing the outside of school, because she introduced me to it. And so those were really good experiences for me, because it introduces me to the environment of what America is. And then it eases my my nervousness and my inadequate feelings of being in the school. But then at the same time, I also realized that I love to learn. So I remember the day when I learned how to read. And I always tell teachers right now is like breaking the code. I finally broke the code. I learned how to blend letters. I learned how to put words together. And then I started reading. And I would be like so excited in school, just waiting. I want the teacher to call on me to read out loud, because for some odd reason, I knew that reading out loud was good for me. It gives me practice to be a better reader. So, but one thing I remember from my early years of learning how to read was that my parents, they did not speak English. They could not read or write. So, and we were very poor. So I have this yearning to read, but I did not have many books. I did not have many books to practice my reading. So at school, I was really excited. But then one day, the church, Sunday school, for some odd reason, they came and they took us to Sunday school so that we can color and we can read with them, so that we can talk, so that we were involved in doing things on the weekend. So I was given a little Bible, and so that's where I learned and practiced to read. I started reading the Bible, and I just remember reading about Adam and Eve because it flows like a story. And so I read that particular chapter, or that particular part, and it taught me how to read. And so now, when I thought back, I was like, yeah, I know about Adam and Eve because I was reading the Bible, because I didn't have anything else to read. And so because of Sunday school, I was introduced to the Bible. And for me to, learning how to read and just want to read, I started reading that particular part because it was more like a story. And for someone like me, learning how to read English, learning how to visualize what I'm reading, seeing what I was reading was very helpful in my reading comprehension and my reading fluency. So that's how I learned how to read. Yeah. So the teacher that introduced me not only to learning in the classroom, but also the environment of America, what it's all about. And it's really funny. I remember her first name and her last name. Her name was Eva Owens, Mrs. Owens. But for some odd reason, I also remember her first name. Eva Owens. And I also remembered that her husband was a basketball player. And you know what? Back then I didn't know what basketball is. I didn't know. I've never seen people play basketball, but right now I have a memory. It's either probably she told me that her husband played basketball. So, but her name was Eva Owens. So when I was enrolled in fourth grade, Denver, Colorado, I remember I had a friend. She's African American, and then I also had another friend. He's white. They both live in the neighborhood that I went to school, but I knew that I wasn't from that neighborhood because I had to take the bus to school every day. And so, yeah, I remember that I can't remember their names, but for the young boy, I remember he talked about going skiing. And for some odd reason, I didn't know what skiing was, but because I experienced snow for the first time, so I remember waiting for the school bus in the snow, very, very cold, so cold. Of course, now I learned that it's not salt. And so I, like right now, I really don't like the snow because of my experience waiting in the snow for the bus to pick me up. It was very, very cold. I don't know how well I was dressed or prepared for that type of weather, but because of my experience waiting for the bus in the snow, as an adult right now, I love the snow, but I probably would not go skiing. Yeah. Yeah, so I had some friends, but like I say, I was very limited in English. I didn't speak English very well, so I also made friends with the kids that were in my little group that were pulled out for learning English. So we became very close, and also with the teacher, she was very, very supportive. So although it was a very scary and lonely journey, but at the same time, I also noticed that there were other people who were very supportive kind and loving and wanting to help me experience America in a positive way as well. Yeah. So we were in Denver, Colorado until from 1982 to 1986. So the weather in my father started working in the factory for AT&T, putting phones together, assembling phones. But because the weather was very harsh for my parents, like the snow, we've never seen snow. We've never lived in that type of environment before. So my parents decided that because my uncle moved to California, to Sacramento, then my father was going to follow him to Sacramento. So in 1986, we moved to Sacramento, and I started school I remember I was so afraid to move up a grade level that I think this is a memory that is true. I told the school that I was in the 4th grade, even though I believe I completed 4th grade, but I was so scared to tell them that I'm now in the 5th grade, that they're gonna put me in a class where I didn't want to be in. So I started 5th grade in Sacramento at Oak Ridge Elementary School. So I was at Oak Ridge Elementary School, and I finished. So that's the first time I was exposed to a more diverse student population. That's the first time when I noticed that, oh, there's Hmong students at this school. There's Mien students at this school. There's Laotian kids at this school. There's African-American kids, and there are Hispanic students. And of course, there's white kids. But wow, it's so diverse. And I have to say that it made me feel, I feel a lot more like this is where I belong. And I don't feel that lonely anymore at that particular time. And I have to say that I remember being pulled out to test again to see if I was, if I'm an English learner, if I need help. But I actually passed the test. And so now I didn't like being pulled out. I want to stay in, and I want to stay inside the classroom with my teacher, and I want to learn. I didn't want to miss anything. And so I was very, very happy that now they're not going to pull me out. And so I was at Oak Ridge for a year, and then I moved on to middle school. Cal Middle School, that was my middle school. I went to Cal Middle School, and it's I guess by this time I'm a typical teenager, and so yes, you start to see, oh, I want to belong, right? I want to belong. I want to run with the crowd. I want to be like them. But one thing for me is that I always have this passion for learning. If I don't go to school at that particular time, I will feel a yearning to want to be in school. And so I finished at Cal Middle School, and then I moved on to CK McClatchy. And I remember at CK McClatchy, I took French for the first time. I remember, wow, it's very different. I love their lunch for some odd reason. And like I said, my family, by this time, we had 12 children by this time already. Okay, so I told her we have 6 girls and we have 6 boys in our family. And so definitely school was a place where, it fed me well. I love their lunch. I'm not hungry, but at the same time, it feeds my love for learning. And so I finished not such a. I didn't finish school at McClatchy. I got married young. I was about 17. And then I met my husband, and so then I got married young, and I was one of those young teenagers in the Hmong culture where, when you're 14 and above, you can marry because you're responsible and you can become a mother and a wife. And so I met my husband, and so I married him. And then I moved with him to the North Highlands area, and I attended North Highlands High School. And that was where I graduated with my diploma. Being a refugee, for me, at the young age, definitely not knowing English, the communication part for me was missing for a very, very long time. From elementary school to middle school to high school, I kept a lot of things to myself. My voice was hidden. I don't speak up in class. I didn't speak up in class much, but I did my work. I knew exactly what I need to do to be successful, but definitely very quiet throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school. So as a refugee, for me, not knowing the language was the most difficult thing, because I honestly believe that I am a social bug, but I kept myself quiet because I felt inadequate. I felt that I, did not know enough to share with my teacher, to share with my classmates. So so that was my greatest struggle. Of course, poverty. My parents, they didn't speak English, so obviously, but my parents, one awesome thing about my parents, even though we had 12 siblings in the family, they were the most amazing parents. They made sure we had what we need, the necessity, a place to live, food. So their whole life, even in America, they grew gardens, they grew food, they grew crops. They will rent. I remember in California, in Sacramento, they rented off a plot of land not too far from right here, where Winkle, that was where they grew food for us. And so, so even right now, in my brother's little land, he allowed my parents to continue to grow crops, to harvest food for us. And that's the greatest thing about my parents, is that they do what they know what to do right now, and we're still eating their veggies, and they still bring food to us. And so, for me, my parents did what they need to do. It's survival mode all the time for them, for their children, and I think they did a wonderful full job with that. For me, as a refugee, I struggled as a child because of course, limited English. Wanted to have a voice, but kept that voice quiet. So I went off to college, but I was married already, of course, and then I became a young mom. But one thing about me is that I think for some odd reason, I feel that I am the change. And so when I married, I was quite young, and I became a mother around like 20. And so I remember telling my sisters, not my brothers, but my sisters, this is America. Oh, let me be the only one to marry young, because you guys can do so much. But man, me, I marry young, so I have to be a mother. I have to be a sister, a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law. I have to be a wife. It's really hard. And so I remember giving those advice to my sisters. And I have to say that none of them married young. They are all very successful career women, all graduated, with great degrees and doing great things for the Hmong community and for the world out there. And whether I made a difference or not, but because I voiced that, I'm very proud that I said something. Definitely when I was younger, I probably had no clue when people asked me, where are you from? Definitely, I know Laos. As I was getting older, when I went to middle school and high school, when that question, where did you come from? I would say I am Hmong. I am from Laos. The thing that I heard the most was, where is Hmong country? Because we really don't have a country, but we're, we were from Laos. That's our home. And then once I get to college, I had to learn about myself all over again. So I have to say that elementary school, middle school, and high school, when people ask me where I'm from, I probably just say Laos. But I always make sure that they know that I am Hmong. And a lot of time, like I say, people say, but where is Hmong land? There's no Hmong land. Well, then I would have to explain myself that there's no Hmong land, but we're from Laos. I learned a little bit. I remember taking a history class in college. And I remember when we got to the section of the text where it talks about the Vietnam War, I remember hardly anything was mentioned about the secret war in Laos. I don't remember. And so that was one thing that made me, kind of made me go, oh, there's a lot more to this section, but it's missing. And so I noticed that. And then when I became a teacher, I also noticed that, that part of the secret war in Laos was also missing. Right now, I have to say, as going through college and as an adult, I know my story. I know that I am Hmong, and I know that I cannot tell people that I am Hmong and I'm from Hmong land. When I say I am Hmong, I know that I will have to explain to people because I need to educate them. We have a long history of originating from China to Laos, to Thailand, and to America. And so to share with people about my identity, who I am, I would have to tell a story. And I don't know how to do it any other way, but to share a story. And I hope that then that person, when he or she meets another Hmong person, then say, oh yeah, I heard that story. I know that. Because one of my experience as a mother, I have my oldest daughter, she graduated from UC Davis, and she went on a trip with a group of her, I believe she was in a club or something, and she said that she went off to the coast and she met an elderly Japanese man. And she came home and she said, Mom, I met this Japanese elder, and he asked me, are you Chinese or are you Korean? And I told him that I am Hmong. And he said, oh, Hmong? What's that? I've never heard of a Hmong person. And so she said, when he asked me, I felt so ashamed because I didn't have a story to tell who I am to him. And so she came home and she asked me, and I say, well, then you're going to sit down. I'm going to tell you, because the next time I want you to help that person know who you are. And so when he meet another Hmong person, then he will say, oh, I know your story, and then move on, right? And so so after my little experience with my daughter, that is also why I got so inspired and motivated that I must publish my books, that I must help preserve the culture, the history, that I must preserve the language for our children. Because even my daughter is a college graduate, she felt inadequate when it comes to her self-identity, when it comes to who her family, where they come from. And to tell people who the Hmong people are is to tell a story. So that's the best way to do. And so what happened was my daughter start learning the history. She started paying attention to where her grandparents came from. She started to listen to my story of my struggle in this country. I didn't become a vice principal overnight. I struggle in my own way to be where I am. I would say my children are very proud that I am a writer and author. It's a 15-year-old dream that I put off for a long, long time. And so, but one thing that motivated me the most to become a writer and make this dream come true is because I do want to preserve the culture, the history, and the language of the Hmong people, because we are losing it. Coming from an oral history, storytelling history, if I don't preserve it in writing, they will be lost. It is very, very important and it's super essential for educators to understand, especially when they're teaching in urban school, in an urban school setting where the population is very diverse with refugee students. And not only refugee students, but with our Hispanic student population, our African American students, to understand that each group of students come from a background rich in knowledge and skills and talents. Our children are very talented in their own way. To learn to build relationship, and to build relationship then is to also learn about who they are. So for example, for the Hmong students, although most students are quite respectful in the school setting, because that's what they're taught at home. You respect teachers because, teachers have things to teach you so that you can be successful. So for me, it's very rare for me to find in most students that would be totally disrespectful to me as an educator. But at the same time, I've also faced most students who are going through lots of the issues at home. For example, social media is causing a lot of issue among our teenagers now. So we do also need to understand that the Hmong children are living in two worlds. So here's the Hmong world. You have to go home, take care of your siblings, help your parents out. And then here's the mainstream worlds where you want to be a teenager, you want to fit in, you want a phone like everybody else, you wear the same Nike shoes or Jordan shoes. So it's very important for teachers and educators to understand that these are some really real struggles for refugee students, and not only refugees, but a lot of our minority students as well. But then if you build relationship with the students and really learn about their background, about their lives at home, you will also notice that everybody comes from a very, very different background too. You can't just say because you're Hmong, then this is how you are too. It's almost like a case by case. And so as assistant principal, I've advised my teachers to definitely be cultural sensitive, to not be judgmental, and also group people, but at the same time go deeper than that. Get to know each family, get to know each student, because each student each student comes with a different struggle and challenge at home. It could be single parents. We don't have a lot of, our divorce rate for Hmong in the Hmong community almost non-existent, but right now it's very high. It's a real reality that not only there are changes with our children, there's also changes in the Hmong community as well. And so it's very important that teachers and educators get to know the students, get to know their family, build that relationship, because once you build that relationship with your students, it's actually a lot easier to be a teacher, because students will come to the classroom and they will respect you because you care. You want to learn about them. You know their struggle. And so that's been my advice for a lot of the teachers that I've worked with, is to support and get to know, build that relationship with the students and get to know them. It makes learning a lot more meaningful for the students, and teaching a lot more meaningful too. To me, being Hmong, again, I'm going to say this. The best way for me when people say, you're Hmong, what is that? because obviously we don't have a Hmong land, and it's very difficult to not be a storyteller. So right now, when I'm promoting in terms of the Hmong culture and history and the Hmong language, it's telling our children to learn about themselves. Learn your grandparents' history, learn your parents' history, because that's what being Hmong is. It's knowing your story, and if you can tell your story, then it helps other people to know who you are. And when you tell it enough, then you just become it, and becoming it makes it a lot easier to accept yourself and to respect yourself. And then, like I say, for my daughter, graduating from college and coming back and do a speech to thank all the elders in your family, then I think it will help their self-esteem, and it will help them to know who they are better. At the same time, also understand that they, for the younger generation to understand that America is their home, but at the same time, they cannot change who they are. They are Hmong, and so they must know their story. And when they're asked to tell the story, they must know how to tell it so that people know who they are. But at the same time, to also really embrace America in a positive way and to become productive and, great contributing citizen to this great country. So, to be Hmong is to tell a story. I don't know how to do it any other way but to tell a story. And then to be a writer, for me, if I want to preserve my culture, then is to not only write fiction, but I must also write nonfiction. And so my goal is to also write a children's books about the Hmong history, so that I can also preserve that for the very young ones, to help our children know who they are. Like I say, we have to start early. If we wait until middle school or high school, then it's already too late. So about 3 years ago, I am from a family of shamans. Uh, I have two brothers who are fully practiced shaman. My older sister, she's a shaman, and she's my sifu. That means she's my master. Um, my grandfather on my father's side, he was a shaman. Um, my so when I was very young, I have feelings that I have spirit guides. So as I got older, and just 3 years ago, it is weird, but it comes to a point where I knew I have to rise as a shaman. So if you research a little bit about Hmong shamanism, it is a great part of our culture and our people for many, many generations. It is how we heal, keep our people healthy, and it is how we heal. And so in the Hmong culture, shamanism, our belief is the physical body, you see, you touch. The spiritual side of it, you cannot see, but everyone has souls. And so when those souls are not in balance on the spiritual side, then it causes illness on the physical side. And so when I rise as a shaman, it wasn't easy. It was very hard because the traditional way of shaman healing in the Hmong culture right now is also changing. And so in my family, I've become the change as well. I do not practice the way my master shaman, my sister. I, I'm more of an energy healer, but I do cross over, and I do go and heal on the other side, the spiritual side, and then I also come back and physically heal the person. So the way I heal people is very, very different. It's not like the traditional way. So I know that I am the change for this particular tradition. And it is not a surprise. Many Hmong healers or many in the Hmong community, we know that the process of healing people is changing now for many shamans, new shamans. And my belief is because it's become very difficult to practice healing the old ways. It's become difficult. So for some reason, now that Hmong people are chosen to become shaman, and you know, I don't wake up one day and say I'm going to be a shaman. It's a very complex process. You are chosen to be a shaman by spirit guides, and so it is a matter of I don't have a choice. I have to learn this great way of healing people. Then you know, my health is at least I'm healthy. If I don't accept this calling, if I don't embrace this calling, it can become a health issue for me, and it's something that I cannot control. And so then the best that I can do for the last 3 years is accept my calling as of being a healer and a shaman. And yes, I've been through several. So for the last 3 years, I've been practicing on how to heal people, and you know, really embracing it. And so here I am. I'm actually very new in this, but at the same time, I'm already starting to heal people. People come to me and they ask me, and I do what I do. And that's another part that that I've realized that I have to accept myself as a Hmong person too. Now, it would be really hard for me to not accept me being a shaman if I didn't learn my history and my culture, that shamanism is a big part of the Hmong people for generations and generations, and it was a way of healing people in our culture. And if I was Chinese or Vietnamese, I mean, shamanism is in many other culture and ethnicity too, but I can only learn about myself that because I am Hmong, and shamanism is a way of healing. It's a tradition. It's a way of helping other people. When I came to that realization, then I accept this total part of myself as being a healer and a shaman, and I have to say I'm quite happy with it. But like I'm fairly new, so I think this is just only the beginning of my journey as a shaman and a healer. And so I don't know what else to say except to really embrace this part of my life as a Hmong person as well. So my father, when we came to Denver, Colorado, my father was given a job at AT&T factory to put telephones together. So he worked there until 1986, and so we moved with to my uncle, which he was in Sacramento. And so when we got to Sacramento, my father couldn't find jobs. So, but I know that my parents rented a small plot of land, so they grew vegetables and lots of other crops. So that's how we survive as a family as well. But my father did get a stipend for servicing for his service as a as a veteran, I believe. But we also have public assistance, I believe, because I remember food stamp. I remember food stamps for some odd reason. And so I believe that helps us with buying food to eat, and we got public housing. We have like Section 8. So those are the things that I know that my family, when we came to California, that's how we survived. But then at the same time, as we, the children, were growing up, a lot of us start working. And that also helped with, working at McDonald, fast food restaurant, working in the store. So that also helped my parents out a lot. But I know that they were on public assistance for a long, long time. And so like right now, my father, my father's on disability for his service. I believe that's what it is. But other than that, so all my sister and my brothers, we grew up, we knew then that my parents had the homes, the food, the basic survival things down, being there for us, transporting us to here and there, making sure that we have the essentials. But we did not have a lot. That's one thing I remember. We did not have a lot. And living in poverty is something that we all survived. But like I say, I think living and growing up in that kind of life puts you in a perspective or perception of life where if you don't want to struggle like your parents, like your family, then you learn from it, and you either try to do, and all parents want their children to do better than them, and so for my parents, they were really on top of us when it comes to going to school, going to the school to meet with the teachers, even though they didn't speak English. So they were also very involved in our education, and at the same time making sure that we had the basics. So did they have jobs? I don't remember my parents working in Sacramento, California, but I remember food stamps. I remember public housing. So I'm sure that they got other support from other people. But as far as all of our siblings, that's one thing that we did not want to be, is we don't want to depend on public system for anything. We really do want to take the opportunity of being in America and making something out of ourselves. So I'm very proud to say that even though we have 12 siblings, we are all very successful. My youngest brothers are twins, and they are professional breakdancers, very, very popular. They were on American's Best Dance Cruise. They're part of the Kinjas group that just competed in America's Best Dance Crew, and they got second place because they were not the returning champion, but they were like this odd group that came in and nobody knows them. So they got, and at the end, it's a fan vote. So obviously they're not as known to the fan, but my brothers, they graduated from Long Beach University, but they're dancing because that's what they love. And so they're break dancers, very, very professional dancer. They dance for celebrities, Chris Browns and many other people. Yeah, and that's something that they strive today. And many of the Hmong youth and many other youth are looking up to them as role models as well. So they're just a prime example of where my family where we had come, how far we've come, is that we've seen America as a land of opportunity. Once we realize that, for me, that there's no dragons or monsters gonna eat you up, I guess at the end of the day, you can be that dragon, you can be that monster, or you can see the sidewalks that paved in gold and and create that world. So I only brought you to my brothers because I am very proud of my siblings, proud of my family. Despite all our struggles and the poverty, I think we've all had the right mindset of what we can make America to be. Since we've been here in the United States, my mother had returned to Thailand, not Laos, because we don't have any relatives in Laos right now. But my mother returned to to Thailand twice because her parents, they immigrated from Laos after the war. They escaped to Thailand, and so they've been in Thailand in the mountains because my grandfather refused to come to America. Because my grandfather refused to come to America, then her oldest brother could not leave. And so my mother had returned to Thailand twice when her parents were alive. But they both passed away. And my mother had told me that she's getting old herself and that her body cannot take the plane ride to Thailand, and she cannot also take the journey of being in a taxi and going up the mountain in really rough terrains. So she has stopped going. My father only returned once to Thailand when my grandfather passed away. And again, my father has health issues, so my brothers are very, very careful when they're gonna travel. They really don't want my parents to travel, and they haven't been to Laos, but my father talked about it often. he talked about visiting Laos, but it's probably safer for him not to go because he was an American CIA soldier. And he always shared that he's the person that carried the radio. He's very proud of his service. He said that he's the person that carried the radio, and when they need anything, he's the messenger. And he also talked about jumping off a plane, parachutes, and things like that. So I know that my parents will love to go back to Laos and at least visit, but it's also very scary. So they have not done that since we've been here. For me, myself, I've never thought about going back to Laos to visit. I am also very fearful myself because just stories that I've heard from other people that either had went or are going. And so I prefer to not make that something that it's a priority in my life right now. But do I want to go? Someday, if I can go to the highlands and bring my books and give it to the children, that would be my goal, is to take my books to all the poor schools and make sure every child gets a chance to read my book. That would be awesome. Yeah. My father, like many other Hmong veterans, are very proud of their service to the American CIA. They talked about it often when they're together. Yes, my father, he knows many other veterans who have served in the war with him. My uncles, a lot of my uncles, a lot of my grandfathers who are grandfathers and not old, but grandfathers by name because of clan and status. So my father, he knows many other veterans, yes. And I think that is one thing for these veterans that they're very proud of. When we have special events in the community and we invite them, oh, they're so proud to wear their uniforms and come and represent that part of themselves. So yes, my father is still in contact with many other soldiers, but also understand that time is going by very fast and there are fewer of them every single day, and so every single year, and that's just a reality that we come to understand. And so that's why again, I'm writing. I'm writing because I want to make sure. I'm writing about, I want to help preserve the Hmong culture, history, and the language, because I want to make sure that, and that's one thing that motivated me was, if I don't do it now, I'm getting older too. And if I have all these beautiful stories in me, I don't want to take it with me. After my parents gone, after I'm gone, it's gone, because we came from an oral story tradition. You tell story, you talk about it. We didn't have a written system until recently when the missionaries came to Laos, and they created a system for us. And so for me, because writing is a passion, but I want to write with a purpose, and my purpose is to try to preserve what I don't want to be lost, and that is the culture, the history, and the language of the Hmong people. So that's where I would like to be a part of, is to kind of leave a legacy of the rich culture and tradition, and especially the folk tales that I was inspired to write, so that our children's children, and for many generations, and not only our people, the Hmong people, but other culture, other people can enjoy it too, because they are beautiful stories.